Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Spotswood live stream. We're so glad that you chose to spend your Sunday morning with us. If this is your first time, we would love to get connected with you. Simply text the word welcome to the number below, or you can hit the Get Connected button at spotswood.org. We would love to partner with you in ministry as well. So if you want to find out more opportunities, visit spotswood.org/give. We're excited to worship with you this morning, so stand up, sit down, whatever's comfortable for you. Let's take a deep breath in and let's raise our voices and worship the Lord.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. You never stop. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop. You never stop working. that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
There was a moment when the lights went out, when death had claimed its victory. The King of Love had given up his life, the darkest day in history. And there on a cross they made for sinners, for every curse his blood atoned. One final breath and it was finished, but not the end we could have known. For the earth began to shake, and the veil was torn. What sacrifice was made as the heavens roar? Oh, hail King Jesus! Oh, hail the Lord of heaven and earth! Oh, hail King Jesus! Oh, hail the Savior of the world! Oh, hail my King! He made a way into the veil, and there was a moment when the sky lit up. A flash of light was breaking through. When all was lost, he crossed eternity. The King of Life was on the move. For in a dark, cold tomb, where our Lord was laid, one miraculous breath, and we're forever changed. Oh, hail King Jesus! Oh, mountains were where you hide. Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you grace the other side. And oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descend from the source of this supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I would search and stop at nothing. You're just not that hard to find. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valley all the same. No less God within the shadows. No less faithful when the night leads me astray. 'Cause you're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. And oh, how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinners past. And oh, how fast would you come running if just to shadow me through the night and trace my steps through all my failures and wipe me out the other side. For who can dare ascend that mountain, the valleyed hill called Calvary? But for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I will praise you on the mountains. I will praise you when the mountain's in my way. 'Cause you're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadow, and no less faithful when the night leads me astray. 'Cause you're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands and the heartache all the same. from a deep but empty grave. Oh, I will praise you on the mountains. I will praise you when the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows. No less faithful when the night leads me astray. 'Cause you're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands, in the heartache, all the same.
Well, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us again, our stream at Spotswood. Want to cover something today that's extremely important before we jump into our sermon. Next Sunday, the first Sunday in June, we are going to be back on campus. It's kind of a welcome home Sunday for all of us. We're going to have two services just like we're doing today with our stream. The first at 9:30. That'll be our traditional service. We'll have our hymns, no choir, no orchestra. Don't know how long it's going to be before we have a chance for our choir and orchestra to return. But the 9:30 a.m. service will be our hymns, our traditional service. And then the 11 a.m. service will have our band. That will be our contemporary service. We need time in between the two services to clean this room. So if you could help us when the first service is over at 9:30, I'll be moving people out of the room kind of like we do in Vacation Bible School. It won't be as much of a challenge when we finish our 11 a.m. service, but after the first service, we need to make sure that we dismiss people to maintain our social distancing. We're going to dismiss, as I said, VBS style. We'll have certain sections going through these doors and certain sections leaving out back through the balcony. The pews are going to be marked in 6-foot sections. It's going to be different in this room next Sunday. Shared last Sunday, different's just different. It's not good, it's not bad, it's just different. So I want to encourage you, when you're on campus this coming Sunday, first Sunday in June, be intentional in what you're doing. Be careful in what you're doing. I have mentioned Philippians chapter 2, verse 4 a number of times. We not only look out for the needs of ourselves, but also for the needs of other people. So be mindful of other people who are here in the building. I remind our parents, feel free to bring your children. It might be a little louder. That's not a problem. We want to be careful with our expectations of what's going to happen in this room. We need to make sure that we don't let this experience in our room keep us from worshiping. We don't need to spend a lot of time evaluating next Sunday what we do and what we don't do. What we should do when we're in this room on this campus is expect God to do what only God can do. That's really what Habakkuk did. I hope you have your Bible. We're in the last chapter of the book of Habakkuk. If you're not already there, join me there soon. And let me ask you to at least be familiar, maybe read or even memorize the first phrase of Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 2. O Lord, this is really a prayer. O Lord, revive your work. Keep reading. In the midst of these years, in the middle of my life, in a season that I've never been in, Habakkuk says, O Lord, revive your work. In the midst of these years, make it known. And then he makes that statement, in your wrath, remember mercy. It's a prayer. And yes, I know, next Sunday, the first Sunday that we're back on campus, that's our first Sunday prayer. We're going to do that different too. You'll hear more about that next Sunday, but I've had a burden in my heart to take that prayer time off of this campus out into our community the first Sunday in June. But there's something else that I want to ask you to do related to prayer starting today, going through Saturday of this week. If you're out shopping, if you're out in the community, if you need to go fill the car up with gas, you just need to get out of the house. Drive to the campus of Spotswood. Drive around the campus of Spotswood and pray for what's going to happen on our campus that first Sunday in June. If you want to park and get out and walk around, that's not a problem. You can't come in the building. That would just create too much of a challenge for us, making sure everything has been cleaned and sanitized. But if you want to get out, if the weather's nice, and just walk around this campus, pray for what's going to happen the first Sunday in June, where we're going to have one of those welcome home experiences on this campus. Pray for us as staff. Pray for our volunteers. Pray for the transitions that we'll be making, the things that are going to be happening in this room. Pray that we all come with an expectation of God to show up and do what only God can do. That was kind of Habakkuk's prayer in the season that he was in and in the season that we're in. Everything's uncertain. There's so much that's unclear. I get that, you get that. But know beyond a shadow of a doubt what Habakkuk knew. God is at work. Look at the first verse of Habakkuk chapter 3. In the first verse, you're going to see in the first part of that verse the word fear. I've tried to remind us every time we're in this room, and I've tried to do this as we've experienced this pandemic in our lifetime, something that none of us have ever experienced before. That word fear has to do more with the reverence of God and the awe of God, not cowering in a corner, afraid to say anything, afraid to do anything. Habakkuk is really expressing the fact that he's more overwhelmed by the holiness of God than he is by the circumstances of his life. He chooses to stay focused on the power and the majesty of God more than he'd ever done at any point in his life. Fear, wisdom, and faith are inseparably linked in the Old Testament. They should be inseparably linked in your heart and in my heart. Before we go much further in this third chapter of the book of Habakkuk, I want to call your attention to a word that appears in the margin of the statements that Habakkuk begins to make as God answers his prayer. It's that little word, Selah. And I've learned the meaning of that little word Selah from Chuck Swindoll, and I think Chuck Swindoll is 100% correct on his thinking that this is a music instruction. This is something for those who are singing. While the music continues to play, what the singers are supposed to do is stop and think about what they've just sung. So what we need to do as we walk through this last chapter of the book of Habakkuk is stop every now and then and think about what we've just heard. Think about what we've just read. And no doubt for most of us, we've had more time over the last 6-8 weeks to think more than we've had time to think. We've had more opportunity to be still and focus our life on the Word of God and our relationship with God. I don't know if this has entered your mind or not, but for the 7.5 billion people alive in our world, they've had a lot more time to stop and think, but certainly not all of these people have been thinking about God. You know that, I know that. But they are beginning to think how difficult and how different life actually is. And it's incredible when you see the change in the book of Habakkuk from the first question that he asks of God, how long, to the commitment that he makes in verse 16 of Habakkuk chapter 3 by saying, I am going to wait patiently on God. So I want you to do something. Do something that I think's probably motivated by, or at least that word is catalytic in what I'm going to ask you to do when it comes to Selah. Jot this down. The deepest answers to the most perplexing questions of life are found when I put my faith and put my trust in God. Now, please do not hear what I am not saying. I am in no way implying that God is obligated to answer all of the questions that I have, all the questions that you have in life. What I am saying is when I put my faith and my trust in God, and as my faith grows deeper and as my trust matures, I begin to understand it really doesn't matter what I go through in life, how uncertain or unclear, I can always trust God. We need to remember who God is. We need to stop and we need to think about who God is and how Habakkuk talks about who God is. You look down to verse 19 of chapter 3, you see that phrase, Lord God. In the Old Testament, that is the strongest name any writer could possibly use to express who God is. And what you may or may not know, that this is the only place outside of the book of Psalms that name for God actually appears. It communicates the trust that we have in God. It communicates the hope that we can have in God. It communicates that we will never understand the majesty of God, but we put our faith in Him and we put our trust in Him. This is critically important for Habakkuk because, listen, the Chaldeans had not come yet. And after the Chaldeans come, and God uses one nation to judge His people, things will never be the same for Habakkuk. When this pandemic is done, and I don't know when it's going to be done, but I have to remind myself and I need to remind you, life's never going to be the same. But God is in control. The God that we know, the God that we trust, the God that we faith is in control. You know, prayer requests are nothing new. A lot of times in our Connect group or the group of men that I'm meeting with, my Forged group, we'll finish by just taking prayer requests. And that's pretty much what Habakkuk does in this last chapter. Chapter 2. This is the only, not chapter 2, sorry, verse 2 of chapter 3. This is the only time in this final chapter that Habakkuk actually asks God to do something. And basically the ask is this: in my lifetime, God, do what you've done before. Now, let me be clear. Habakkuk is not asking to go back to the way it was before, but to do what he had done before. So back to what we've said time and time again. I'll mention it now. I'll mention it again in just a few minutes. Habakkuk's faith. Habakkuk lived an expectant faith. Do you? Do I? When I'm in situations and relationships in life that I can't control, that I can't understand, do I really have this expectant faith that even in the midst of a pandemic, God's best is yet to come? That was Habakkuk's faith. That's what it means to live with an expectant faith. Second thing about Habakkuk and his faith in this prayer request, do what you've done before, is this. Habakkuk knew that faith in God, that's the only way you're ever going to make sense of life. When you start reading at verse 3 and you go all the way through verse 16, Habakkuk seems to be saying, you know, it really doesn't matter how long it's going to take for the judgment of God to come. The judgment of God was going to come. And what Habakkuk seems to be saying is, he refused to compromise. We've covered that before. And he refused to be afraid. March of 2020, just a few months ago, in many of our lives and in our nation, many nations of the world, there was one emotion that people began experiencing to a degree that they had never experienced before. And that emotion is fear. And I want to read something to you. If you're wrestling still with fear in your life and the uncertainty of life and the inability to control the circumstances you find yourself in, if you're wrestling with fear, let me read something to you that the psalmist wrote. Psalm 62, verse 6, verse 7, verse 8. God is only my rock and my salvation, my stronghold. I shall not be shaken. On God my salvation and my glory rest. The rock of my strength, my refuge is in God. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour your heart out before him. God is a refuge for us. And then you see that same word again that you see in Habakkuk chapter 3. It's that word Selah. Think about what you just read. Think about what you've just heard. That God is a rock. He can't be shaken. And that we can pour out our heart to him, as many of us have over the last couple of months, or perhaps over our lifetime as followers of Jesus Christ. And what we have found is he is an amazing refuge. Habakkuk lives with an expectant faith. He knows that the only way you can make sense in the chaos is to put your faith in God. And Habakkuk knew that the judgment of God, which was coming, the Chaldeans, the judgment of God is always filtered through the mercy of God. The only reason God did not destroy his people was because of his mercy. Well, you need to remember that the mercy of God is the compassion of God. And Habakkuk's hope in this season of life is that God would continue to be merciful and that God would continue to be compassionate. That's his hope. Who's your hope? Struggle that we're living in right now. I don't know what's going to take place tomorrow. There are plans for next Sunday. I don't know if those are going to happen. Who's your hope? In the current struggle, the pandemic in our world, there is a widespread loss of hope. All of the negative, unclear information causes people to lose hope. The statistics that we've heard for months now, and all of us know that statistics can be used to enable you to say whatever it is that you want to say. So people lose hope. I said a couple of weeks ago, by now, every one of us knows someone who's either died from COVID-19 or a family member of someone that we know has died because of COVID-19. But today, I just want to turn the page for a moment and remind us of this one truth. Every one of us also knows someone who's had COVID-19 and lived. I was talking to my best friend back in Louisiana maybe 2 weeks ago, and we were on this subject of COVID-19 and a friend of his whose wife had died, and his compassion and concern for his friend. I'm just sitting with him one afternoon and not really talking about anything, just shedding tears together. And he told me something that I didn't know. He mentioned that his daughter-in-law and his grandson Kyle last December, they had been really, really sick. And it was a couple of weeks, just could not seem to shake what they were dealing with. And when all of this COVID-19 thing came out, they decided, let's go get tested and find out, did we have COVID-19? Because in December of 2019, nobody was talking about COVID-19. Come to find out, Merritt and Kyle, they had COVID-19. They're fine. Of course, that's an assumption that Kyle was fine before all this started, but I won't go there. They're fine. And I guess everyone in this congregation knows something about Rhonda and Chuck Kelly. Chuck Kelly is the retired president of New Orleans Seminary. He's preached for me. Rhonda has been here, taught our ladies. A lot of you ladies have probably read books she's contributed to or books that she's written. I've mentioned this before. Rhonda Kelly's 93-year-old mother had COVID-19. She spent a couple of weeks in the hospital. She lived. She has this vivacious smile. Just being around her lifts your spirit. I can't tell you the ministry that she had to the doctors and the nurses while having COVID-19 in the hospital in New Orleans, and how she went from the hospital to a rehab facility, and she continues to get stronger and stronger and stronger. What an amazing way for God to use a 93-year-old woman to have the testimony of belief in the power and the majesty and the ability of God to do whatever He wanted with her life. There are story after story after story just like that, but you don't hear those stories. You probably haven't heard. Pretty much 95% of all of those who contract COVID-19 survive. We're wrestling with and struggling with losing hope as the pandemic continues. So here's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to give you some homework from church because you're at home a lot right now. I want you to search for the word hope. Whatever Bible program you want to use, I use Bible Gateway. Number one reason, it's free. Find a Bible program, search for the word hope. And then what I want you to do, I did this. I want you to, on the right side of you using Bible Gateway, find the Bible book list, the book of Psalms. Click on that, and it will open all of the time in the book of Psalms. There's 20 or so verses that word hope appears. And like me, I want you to copy and paste those verses and then print them out. And I want to ask you to read them. Which ones? All of them. And I want to challenge you. I'm going to do this. Memorize some of those verses. Let me give you an example of one of those verses you ought to memorize. Psalm 31, verse 24. Be strong and let your heart take courage, all you who hope in the Lord. Or you say, well, that's the Old Testament. I don't know about going. No problem. Go to the New Testament. Same search, hope. Start in the book of Romans. And you can limit it to, as far as your printing is concerned, limit it to the letters of the Apostle Paul. Over 40 times, you're going to see that he uses the word hope. Print those verses. Read them. Memorize them if you're losing hope. I've been so looking forward to chapter 3 in the book of Habakkuk, because here you find one of the most amazing affirmations of faith that you'll find in the Bible. Verse 18. I want to read it. Habakkuk writes, I will exalt in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Struggle isn't over. I say again what I said a minute ago. The Chaldeans had yet to come. Circumstances hadn't changed. Neither have ours. Verse 17 should start with the word though, which reminds us Habakkuk gets it. I don't know when the judgment's coming. I don't know when the challenges are going to be over. May happen soon. So back to what Habakkuk does. Habakkuk's faith grows stronger facing insurmountable obstacles. And I promise you what God did for Habakkuk, He'll do for you. He's done it for me. Let's read that verse. Verse 17, though the fig tree should not blossom and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail and the fields produce no food, though the flock be cut off from the fold and there be no cattle in the stall. Do you realize what Habakkuk is describing? He's describing an economic disaster. Think about where we are in our world. We are in the beginning, or perhaps in the middle, of an economic disaster. A disaster that none of us have seen before in our lives. And the majority of our world wasn't prepared. Our world, think about this, our world economy has been brought to a standstill by a germ that no one can see. In 5 decades, I have never been told to go home and stay inside. Listen, when I was a kid, the worst punishment in the world was having to stay inside the house. But you know what I thought about as I read and prayed through and prepared for our time together this morning? God's provided before, and I have no doubt God's going to provide again. What about you? Now, thing is, you can't just say yes because you're supposed to say yes in a sermon, or Jesus because Jesus is the answer to the questions asked in a sermon. And really, in your heart, you know that the answer is no, because there are unpaid bills wherever it is that you keep your stack of bills, and there's no job to go to tomorrow. Personally, for me, the gap between where I am and where the things that I can't control or change is getting wider and wider by the moment. But there is no gap in my trust and my faith in God. And my challenge to you is close the gap if there's a hole in your trust and your faith in God. How you do that? Well, do what Habakkuk did. Habakkuk chose joy. Look at verse 18. I read it. I will exalt in the Lord. That word exalt means rejoice. I will rejoice in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Do you hear the impact Habakkuk's life had on Paul again? Philippians 4, chapter 8. What did Paul write? Rejoice in the Lord, and again I say rejoice. He got it from Habakkuk. Paul chose joy in his life. Please don't forget, Paul's letter to the church at Philippi was written from a prison in Rome. And in prison in Rome, Paul instructed believers to do exactly what he was doing, rejoice in the Lord. Listen, maybe you did. I did not plan for a pandemic when I planned my 2020 calendar. Pretty much all of my travel has been erased. Trips that I'd been looking forward to taking, spending time with friends that I was looking forward to spending time with, going to see our grandson. But you know what? I'm choosing to rejoice. How about you? If I lost all of the stuff that I've worked for and accumulated in life, and let me tell you this, at 58, my life looks very, very different than what I anticipated. As far as the physical condition of my life is concerned, as far as the financial condition of my life is concerned, it's different. But I will rejoice because I have not and I will not, I cannot lose my relationship with God. Please don't miss this. Habakkuk's I will attitude toward God is the attitude that I must have, that you must have toward God. You see it in verse 18. Remember, an attitude is a way of thinking that we learn over time. I don't know how much time passed between chapter 1 and chapter 3. But I do see that Habakkuk's attitude changed from how long, not accusatory in nature, just curious, God, how long? And really by the time you get to the end of chapter 3, how long doesn't matter anymore, because his commitment is, I will. some of you know, I've mentioned it, some of you know that our grandson was with us in our home for about 5 weeks. And Kason is at the why stage of his young life. I do not believe that at any point in my lifetime over a 5-week period, I heard the word why as much as I heard the word why while Kason was in our home. I can promise you this: if for the rest of my life I never hear the word why again, I'm good. But it caused me to think about something. As far as my life of faith is concerned, as far as your life of faith is concerned, are you still struggling in that why, God, why? Are you in that why stage? Are you in that I will stage? You can't be at both. You have to be in one or the other. As I was preparing for our time together today, I'm reading a number of different commentaries on the book of Habakkuk. There aren't that many. It's such a small book. But one of the writers that I'm reading encouraged us to read the book of Habakkuk, knowing that the ultimate fulfillment of Habakkuk's hope is found in the person of Jesus Christ. And there's a reference, obviously, verse 13, to salvation. So there is this forward-looking perspective that we should have, understanding Habakkuk's writing, that he didn't see what we've seen as far as what God's done in his one and only Son, Jesus Christ. We know that Jesus and only Jesus is the only way we will ever have a relationship with God. But if I could offer you a new thought this morning, I'd like to do that. For the rest of my life, for the rest of your life, if you're a believer, you're going to be following Jesus. And as you follow Jesus, this made so much of an impact on my life as I read through this. I pray that it will make an impact on your life as you hear it this morning. Jot it down. Jesus isn't interested in sharing your heart with anyone or anything. If your attitude is slipping and in fear, you find yourself in that why God stage of life, do what Habakkuk did. I will rejoice in the Lord. Verse 18, I will rejoice in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Father, I think that's key for many of us in this season in our lives as followers of Jesus. This has certainly been a season when you have grabbed our attention, where we've had more time to think, we've had more time to pray, and Father, unfortunately, more time to find ourselves wrestling with fear. So Lord, I pray my challenges, my encouragement today would take root in the heart of those who hear, in my heart. And that, God, we would begin bearing fruit in our conversations, fruit in our relationships, fruit as we're back on this campus next Sunday. And that our hope would be increasing. That the quotient of joy in our life would be on the increase and not the decrease. God, we know the challenge isn't over yet. But you are our rock. And God, I thank you that the rock we have in Jesus will not be shaken. In his amazing name I pray. Amen. Now, what you've seen today is a lot like what you're going to see next Sunday. So before I finish and we move on to what's next, let me just remind you, next Sunday, when you're on campus in this room at the end of that 9:30 service, I'm going to be dismissing the auditorium in sections. So if you would, please just stay seated after the sermon. And I'll go section by section, main floor, balcony, moving through different doors, making sure we're maintaining our social distance. I appreciate your help in that. And also next Sunday, I know we like to hang out and talk, but we can't hang out and talk in the foyer, and we can't hang out and talk in this room because this room has to be prepared for the service that's coming at 11. So if you don't mind, if you want to meet friends somewhere in our community off this campus, fantastic. But let's make a quick exit through this room. Let's not go back in the foyer and spend a lot of time. And let's make sure that we are, Philippians 2:4, not just looking out for what we want, but for the needs of others. God bless. Love you. Look forward to seeing you with me in this room next Sunday.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's stream. We know that many of you may have made a decision, whether it's to become a Christian or get baptized, or maybe you want to make Spotswood your church family. We would love to help you process the next steps. All you need to do is visit spotswood.org/getconnected for more details. We love you guys. We're praying for you, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week, and we will see you next Sunday here on campus for worship.